Today you'll see two beautiful tops. One is sleeveless, one has long sleeves, beautiful square necklines. You can also put a square neckline in the back if you want. So beautiful. Stay with me. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing. I'm coming to you from my parents' backyard in Chile in the middle of winter. It's a really nice, beautiful sunny day. It looks like it's hot, but it's not hot. That's why I'm dressed up here to film for you. It's frosty. Maybe you can see it. And what I'm doing here is showing my recent make. I actually finished one of these tops just a few hours ago at my parents' home, but I was able to film the tutorial back in Brazil where I lived before flying over here. What I'm bringing today for you is a pattern called Bloom. It's brand new from Sinclair Patterns, and this is a woven top. As soon as I saw the line art, I was drawn into that square neckline straight away. Necklines are usually what my eye focuses on straight away when I see line art of whatever, a coat, a jacket, a t-shirt, whatever. I always see, what is the neckline? And if it's square, it's already special because there's not many out there. Most patterns don't draft a square neckline. There are a few, of course, but it's not very common like you see a V or a round neckline. And I think it's super pretty. For all the versions, the square neckline is on the front. For the back, you can choose whether you want to do it round or square as well. The square is not as deep as it is in the front, of course, a little higher. There's a front yoke and a back yoke. Both of those yokes are double, they are lined, so it's fully enclosed inside, very beautiful. And then below those yokes, in the front and the back, you're going to have a piece that's wider and it's going to be gathered into there, as you can see in the line art. As something extra that you can do if you want to, between the yoke and the front piece, you can add a little ruffle that's gathered in there as well, something extra. I'm not doing that option, I'm just keeping it simple. And then for the sleeves, you can do it sleeveless. If you're gonna do the sleeveless armhole, it's a super interesting sewing technique. The yoke is double, so up to this area, like the middle of the armhole, front and back, you're gonna have the two layers of the yoke enclosing that. But then from here to the other side, you're gonna have a little bit of binding. They're sewn in separate sections, very easy. You can do it with different lengths of sleeves, short sleeves and a long sleeve. The long sleeve is gathered here onto the armhole on the top of the sleeve cap. It's also very wide and gathered into a small little cuff at the bottom. Very simple, there's no buttons, slit, nothing like that, very easy to sew. And it's just gorgeous. Maybe if you're newer to sewing, you're gonna find the version with the sleeve much easier to sew than the version that is sleeveless. Not that the sleeveless one is hard, it's just got a few more steps and a really simple burrito method in there. That is the one I've chosen to film for you, but I'm also going to show you what's different with the version with sleeves that you're going to find is a little more straightforward. Then going down, you have different lengths. I've just chosen the regular length that will hit the mid-hip, and then you can do a tunic as well. And you can sew the side seams plain, just sew them all the way down, or you can do a split hem, a little slit on the side. If you choose to do the split on the side, the back hem is going to end up 1 inch longer than the front hem, and there's a different cut line for that. But if you just want to do the simple hem, then you cut at the one that's going to be level with the front. You find all those lines on the pattern piece. Because Bloom is brand new at Sinclair Patterns, it'll be discounted. I believe it's 27%. I'm also not exactly sure until when the sale runs. When I still have missing information from the designer, I always leave you all the information in the description box, and right at the top of the comment section I pin it there so it's easy for you to find. If you click on the link and go to the website and end up purchasing, I receive a small commission back because that's an affiliate link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but is one way that you can support the work that I do here on YouTube. I create all this content for you that is free for you to enjoy, and it's a lot of work. So one way that I make an income is by using affiliate links with some patterns. So if you do end up using it, I'm super grateful. For fabrics, this is designed for woven fabrics. I would not make this in a knit fabric at all. You know, when you have a square neckline, you really want this to fit exactly. You don't want that to end up wider or gaping, and that could happen with a knit. So I would highly suggest not making it with a knit fabric at all. Just don't even, I know someone always is going to ask. It's just predictable. That's why I always want to say that I wouldn't do it. Of course, you can do whatever you want, you can experiment, but it might lead to frustration, waste of time and fabric. So I'm just giving you the little warning. According to my experience, I wouldn't do it. There are some woven designs that I think can be made with knit fabrics, and when I do find them, I do mention that. It's just that I don't think this is one of them. Woven fabrics, lightweight, I think are gonna work the best. The way that I like to sew and wear my clothing, whenever I see gathers as a feature on a pattern, I always want a fabric that drapes, because then the gathers are just gonna look more delicate. They're gonna flow closer to the body and not stand out, stick out away from the body. I like using 100% rayon. It can be a lightweight plain weave or other types of rayon, rayon challis, rayon crepe, a little heavier for winter. If you wanna do a long version, could be a rayon twill. A tencel twill would be amazing. I wouldn't go to heavyweight fabrics for this one. I think the gathers and the layers of the yoke would end up being too bulky, so keeping it lightweight is nice. For both of my versions, I've chosen a rayon linen blend. It's those blends where it's 87% rayon, mostly rayon, and then 13% linen, and it's still very lightweight and flowy. You could find different blends in those. I've seen some that are 85 to 15, you know, or just use 100% rayon. I just happen to like this blend a lot, and I can find it easily in Brazil in solids and prints, and I really love how it looks and how it drapes. So that is my choice, both for a solid one that I'm making sleeveless and a long sleeve version that I'm making with a print. Of course, I know a lot of people are gonna like their cottons, their lightweight cotton voiles and cotton lawns, you know. If it's something very loosely woven, I highly suggest you interface both yoke pieces, the inner yoke and the outer yoke. I would say mine isn't terribly dense in the weave, this rayon linen blend, like I can see the threads. I always opt to interface both layers for the inner and the outer. Maybe if I was using a cotton lawn, I would just interface the outer layer, and the inner layer I would leave it uninterfaced, because that type of weave is more dense. So have a feel of your fabric. I would suggest you don't use crinkle rayon. Oh my gosh, that stuff just grows and deforms. And when you need the exact type of sewing with square necklines, I wouldn't want to use crinkle rayon at all. I wouldn't want to use quilting cotton either, because I think the gathers will just stick out of your body. So those are just my thoughts on fabric. You need some fusible interfacing. You don't need much, you just need to interface the yoke pieces. Definitely one layer, maybe 2 layers, just depends on how light your fabric is. The sizing goes from 0 to 30 US, goes up to a 63-inch hip at the largest size. If you've sewn Sinclair patterns before, you know that before choosing your size, you choose your height file. It's going to give you such a good fit. So you have petite, regular and tall. This is a graphic here that shows you the heights. Choose that height file first. I always choose the tall file because I fit within that height there at 5'8". Beautiful, because the armhole there. So many things that are vertical are so important in fitting. It's not just about fitting into the circumferences. The vertical proportions are super important as well. And having these height files is golden, and it always works a treat. After choosing your height file, then look at the size chart and plot your measurements down. The ease here around the bust is going to be about 5 inches. Then at the waist you have a lot, because it's pretty much straight down. And then towards the hip, depending on the size that you're sewing, it'll be 3 to 5 inches of ease. One awesome thing that Oksana is doing, she's the owner of Sinclair Patterns. For the last couple of woven patterns, I have seen that she's been adding cup sizes now into groups with an AB cup size, CD, EF. You're going to have such an amazing fit at the bust. You know, your sewing cup size is not the same as the cup size that you use for your bra. You just need to take your high bust measurement and your full bust measurement and compare what the difference is, and that's how you're going to know what sewing cup size you are. I choose a sewing cup size CD because my differences are 3. If it was 4, I could use that option as well. I think these options for bust cup sizes are also golden, as well as the height files. At this point, my measurements are into a size 14, 16, but I'm just sewing a 16. I'd rather not size down usually. At this point, because I've sewn so many and I know the block, I don't do any test garments. I just go straight in to my nice fabric and get a good result. I have focused the sewing tutorial on the sleeveless version because I think it offers something new with the burrito method, and the sleeveless finish is so interesting. Something I haven't really seen before in another pattern, so I thought that was really interesting to share. When I get to the sleeve part where you could add the sleeve, if you're sewing the sleeve, I'll mention that and show you. So one thing about the sleeve, one about the sleeveless option, if you're doing that, you're going to see on the pattern piece in these little armhole areas a smaller cut line to cut in. You end up trimming away from the paper pattern about 1/4 inch. That's where the new cut line is for the sleeveless. And that's got to do with the binding and how that's going to be finished later on. When you see the tutorial, it'll make sense. Seam allowance is quite big, so you're going to see me trimming that down to half in most areas, probably all of them. I'll show you the front and back yoke pieces first. In theory, you should only interface the outer layer and the inner layer is going to be left uninterfaced. You cut two of both the front and the back facing. But because my fabric is pretty flimsy and I want this neckline to be nice and structured, I've opted to interface both layers. So what you see me cutting out here with my rotary cutter are two back yokes. You can see that this back yoke has a round neckline, but there's also a different cut line there where you can make the back yoke a square neckline as well as the front one that you see on the top of the screen. Just personal preference, I'm making one of each, but in this tutorial you're going to see the round back neckline option. It's this, if you're doing the back square neckline option, it's just the same, you just have more corners. This is block fusing. All my layers of fabric are already interfaced, as you can see, and now I'm using my rotary cutter to cut neatly. And this is going to ensure that both layers are going to be exactly the same shape and size, and they're not going to change shape from the original pattern piece that I've got on top. So this is my preferred way to do it. If you want to go deeper into block fusing, I have a whole video about it. For this tutorial, you're going to see the sleeveless version. The front and the back pieces are both cut on the fold. There are my yokes, the back and the front, both there are two layers. I have interfaced both of mine. The front and back pieces are wider than the yoke pieces because they're going to be gathered there in the center area, as you can see in the line art. What I've got missing here is the small amount of binding I'm going to need for these little partial armholes. I'll cut that from scraps. And for the sleeveless version, that's all you need. I don't have a sleeve and a cuff here. First, we're just going to put the front and the back yokes together, both for the inner layer and the outer layer, and get these shoulder seams sewn. I'm going to pin these. Remember, I'm interfacing both my inner and my outer layer, so I have identical pieces here. But depending on the fabric, you might have an inner layer that's not interfaced. But this fabric is sort of loosely woven, and I feel it's going to be more structured if I interface both layers. Here we are sewing shoulder seams, 4 of them because there's 2 layers. The seam allowance for this pattern is pretty big, it's 5/8 of an inch, so make sure you do that accurately. And after doing that, of course, I don't want to leave 5/8 of an inch of seam allowance inside the garment, so I'm just trimming that in half before I go and press these seams open. Now that the shoulder seams are sewn for both layers, we're going to lay them right sides together and align the neckline. Of course, you know I'm going to hand baste this before sewing this neckline. Here is my neckline right sides together, both layers. You can see the dots I've drawn to pivot really nice and accurately. Those dots are on the pattern. I've hand basted and I've got a round neckline. You also have the option of doing a square neckline, but that's not what I'm doing here. And now I'm just going to sew these at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, being really careful to keep that seam allowance accurate. Hand basting helps a great deal to do this with ease without the pieces moving anywhere. I always think hand basting is a great use of 1 minute of your time. I'm pivoting carefully where I have the dots in the square neckline area that's on the front. If you have the square neckline on the back, then you would just do the same thing. It's just that mine is round. Now, before turning these right sides out and understitching, I'm going to trim away seam allowance the same as I did with the shoulder seams. It's just too much to leave in there. And after trimming away, I'm going to do some snips. I'm going to snip in the corners for the square neckline, and then I'm going to snip around the back neckline because it's curved. All the straight edges of the square neckline, you don't need to snip. It's just the round areas of the back. And then if you were doing the square neckline on the back, you would just have to snip into corners. That's all you would need to do. Now we need to understitch the seam allowance towards the inner layer. So in my case, my inner and outer are the same because they're both interfaced. But if you're following instructions, your inner layer is not going to be interfaced. That's where you push your seam allowance towards and sew on the edge. This is another presser foot. This has an L on it. It's also a type of blind hem presser foot, but different. When you move this, it moves this edge in or out, so you can actually get whatever seam allowance you want, and it's really helpful. I've set it here to about 1/8 of an inch. I'm not understitching around the corners, so I'm stopping before each corner, just a tiny distance away, and then I'm starting after the corner, a little bit away from the corner, so the corners are free and they can be super nice and crisp. I've headed to the iron and pressed everything. Here up close, I'm showing you the understitched area. That's going to be my inner layer. And I'm going to just fold that out of the way. The one that's nice and extended on the table is the outer layer, and that's where we're going to sew our front and back pieces that will have gathering in there. There are several notches along the way to help you gather, and here is one of the pieces. Here is the front. You can see there's quite a bit to gather in there. Here is the front piece. You can see several marks along the top. One thing I did off screen was to bind the partial armholes, very tiny areas there that you bind first. We're going to do some gathering stitches so that we can gather this onto the yoke pieces. So we're going to find a mark a few inches from the edge, and it goes all the way across to the other side. You also find another mark a few inches away from the edge. That is our distance that we need to gather. And I'm doing the first gathering stitch at 1/4 inch with a long stitch length. And because the seam allowance we're going to use later to sew this to the yoke is at 5/8, my second row of gathering stitches is going to be done at 3/4 inch from the edge. It looks like quite a distance, but when we do the gathering and the seam later, the seam is going to end up right in the area of the gathering, and it's going to give you really, really nice gathers. So I'm just going over the second row now, and I'm going to do the same for the back. Okay, here you can see there's a tiny mark right next to the edge of the yoke. That's where the edge of the binding should reach. And then you have the marks for your gathering. You can see all the excess that we have. So the first section is 1-to-1. There's always going to be 5/8 inch left over of that yoke, because that's how we're going to finish the sleeveless armhole later. So make sure you have everything lined up with the marks. Okay, I've done all the gathering. It's all super neat. 1-to-1 at first, and then gathered towards the center. Little bit of the yoke hanging off on the sides by 5/8 inch. So the first section that we're sewing the front to the yoke is not gathered, as you can see. It's just 1-to-1. And then we find our gathered section that was from where the marks were, and we're going to sew. You can see my 5/8 seam allowance is landing right in the middle of this gathered section. That's why I did 2 rows, one at 1/4 inch and one at 3/4 inch, so that it works nicely. And I'm going to repeat the same thing for the back yoke with the back piece. It's all the same thing. It's just that there's less gathering at the back. After sewing this seam, again, I'm going to trim away the seam allowance to about half of what we have there. We don't really need all that seam allowance inside the blouse, so I'm just cutting all of this excess away. Now I repeat the same process with the back. You can see there's way less gathering at the back. The yoke is also hanging off by 5/8, matching the marks right there. And this is another seam that I'm going to repeat the process for, the same as I did to the front, exactly the same. And after sewing this one, I'm also going to trim the seam allowance like you just saw. After sewing the front and the back to the main yokes, the outer yokes, we still have this inner yoke inside that's free. And what you're seeing me do now is a guide stitch at 5/8 inch with a long stitch length. This is going to allow me to press this raw edge towards the inside, wrong sides together later on like this, because this is how the inner yoke is going to be finished on the inside. So I'm going to do that for both sides, the front and the back inner yokes, the ones that are free without any pieces sewn onto them yet. I'm going to repeat that and head off to the iron and neaten it all up. This is how it looks like. The blouse is wrong sides up. You can see the seam with the gathering in the front right there. The partial armholes are bound right there. The inner yoke is still free. I have already pressed that edge in by 5/8 inch. You saw me doing the guide stitch a few seconds ago. And now we have these raw armholes there that you might be thinking, how on earth is this going to be finished? Well, I'm going to show you next. If you're doing the version with the sleeve, it's really easy. You're up to here, you do the same thing. All you would do is baste those 2 yoke layers together. You wouldn't have binding on the armholes, so the edges of your armholes would reach the same edge as the yoke, and then you would just sew in your sleeve flat, or sew the side seams and set it. Doing the version with the sleeve could be more straightforward. Okay, to do this simple burrito method, we just keep the blouse like this. The inner yoke is still loose. That comes at a later stage. All we're going to do is take the whole blouse and roll it, just extending everything like it is, like that. We're going to take the whole blouse and roll it over to the other side like this to reach the other shoulder area. Once we get there, we're going to open this one up and just enclose this roll that we did. Once we meet that, we have our roll inside this area, and this is going to finish this armhole. You can see it's super easy. And now these 2 raw edges that are right sides together, that's what we're going to sew to close one of the armholes. I'm going to do that off camera. Trim and snip. Here we are. The seam has been sewn. I have trimmed away seam allowance. I have snipped because this is a curved area. And now all we need to do is pull the garment from within this row. Just start pulling it out. The shoulders are quite wide, so it's easy to do. It'll come flying right out. And then you're going to have one armhole done. It's as easy as that. I found it super easy to do. There we go. We still have the inner yoke loose. Don't worry, that comes later. And now we're going to finish the other armhole, which means that we're just going to roll this finished armhole towards the one that's open right there. So let's just take this and roll it to the other side the same way we did before. Very nice little roll. Once we reach the shoulder area that's raw, we just open that up and enclose the roll. Meet these yoke pieces right sides together right there. Sew this, trim and snip like the other side. Super easy. Okay, there is the other armhole sewn, very short seam, slightly curved, trimmed and snipped. Then we can pull the garment right sides out through there. And now we're going to have two finished armholes, completely finished, partially by the burrito method, and then beneath the yoke we have the bound edges right there. And now we have this inner yoke that needs to be sewn in. The fold that we have there, I'm going to make sure it covers that seam by a little bit, and I'm going to hand baste that to keep it in place. There we have it, nice and hand basted. I would not do it any other way because I want to make sure I'm going to catch that loose inner yoke that was on the inside. That area is loose, so I made sure that my fold inside is covering the seam I'm going to do. Again, I'm going to use my handy dandy presser foot to get a really nice edge stitch, and I'm going to go ahead from one side to the other and repeat for both the front and the back. At this point, the side seams are not sewn. I'm going to go ahead and sew those. I have serged the edges separately so I can press the seam allowance open. And then I have to do my hem, and I'm done with the sleeveless version. This is my first version. It's like a military green situation here. It's very nice. Here is the front square neckline, double yokes. Both are interfaced in my case. I just chose to do that. I think it's better for this fabric. And it's so nice. You can't see the inner layer because everything is understitched in here. So that's always super neat. And for this one, I did the round neckline on the back as an option. You know, you're going to find a different cut line over here to make this a square neckline on the back as well. And I did that with my second version. Less gathers on the back than on the front. That's top stitched down there. If I would have had more time, I would have probably hand sewn this inside with a slip stitch to make it really clean and have no top stitching at all. But I was on a time constraint when I was sewing this one. But I think if you had extra time and you wanted to sew it by hand on the inside, I think it would be so worth it. So that is an option that you could think about if you have extra time and enjoy hand sewing and it's relaxing for you. It can be for me, and I've been known to sew things by hand inside to not top stitch here on the top. But the top stitching is okay. I've done the regular hem. I haven't done the slit on the side this time. The hem is straight, there's no curve here. The binding here is done partially on the little armholes, and then you get this bulk here on the side because the side seam is the last thing that you sew. So I pushed the seam allowance to the back here and just tucked it down there so that it doesn't move anywhere, it doesn't poke anything. So it's all tucked by hand right there. That's super neat. And then the hem was done at the very end, super neat. I mean, once you've done the neckline, all the rest is so easy. And remember, once you get to the stage of doing the burrito roll, if you're doing the sleeveless version, if you're not doing the sleeveless version, everything's going to line up there. You can baste the yokes together. You're going to have an open armhole. If you love setting in your sleeves on the flat, do it then. If not, do the side seam and construct your sleeves separately and set it in separately. That is the way that I like to do it. So just mentioning, you always have different options when you sew, but I found the sleeveless technique here that encloses everything in the yoke area super, super clever, and for sure I'm going to replicate again if I'm going to be adding a yoke onto something that doesn't have it. You know, that's something I do sometimes. So yeah, this is lovely. Look, for styling, I'm at my parents'. I don't have options for styling, so you're just going to see it one way, and it's with the same denim skirt I know I left here in the summer. I'm freezing out here while I'm modeling for you in my little high heel sandals and my mom's shoes, by the way. But it's a beautiful sunny day and I wanted the best shots possible. So let's see this one on. This is my first bloom top from Sinclair Patterns in size 16 with the toe file. I have a regular length here. There are other longer lengths, but I think this is good. This is a ready to wear denim skirt. Very simple styling. I only have one option to share with you here. It's what I have available. And I love this military green. It's super nice, and because it's a solid, you can see the details. This is the length that I like here for this one. You can also do a split hem on the side, but I thought this top was too short for a split hem. The longer versions would of course suit it much better, and I like the mid-hip length. Here is the front yoke, top stitched, and the gathering below it, and the square neckline sleeveless version. The bottom of the armhole is finished with binding and the top is enclosed with a burrito roll with the front and the back yoke. Here is the front neckline. It's super nice, square neckline. It's not too low. It's very safe. When you move around you don't see anything, and I've opted for the round neckline on the back. You can also do a square neckline on the back, and you can see the delicate gathers on the back. Yoke as well, much less on the front. Super cute. I think it's a really nice top, a really fun make, different techniques, and I really enjoyed making this one. Here is my second version. Now I've sewn different garments in the same type of print, only in a different colorway. Instead of the blue, it was sort of a burgundy pink. This time it's blue and like a lighter blue. So beautiful. There's a little bit of animal print in here, maybe a little bit of leopard and some leaves. Such an interesting print, but mainly with a white background. Long sleeves here instead. So here on the top, from where the yoke seam is to the sides, you're going to gather for about 2 or 3 inches. Just depends on what you like. I think that's really, really nice. It's not excessive, it's not super poofy. And then at the bottom, it's gathered into that little cuff over here. But I did not film the sleeves this time. And here is my square neckline on the front, there. And my square neckline on the back in this one as well. The only difference here is that you have 2 extra corners to sew. It's not that it's harder, it's just different. And then your understitching is always done in a lot of sections there to avoid those corners. At least that's how I do it. This one has also got both layers of the yoke interfaced and then the gathers here. Very subtle, very nice. With this one, because it's all a print, you can't see many of the details, but maybe you can still see them. I did a regular side seam here as well. Didn't do the side splits on any of these versions. That is my second version. So, so gorgeous. Let's see this one on, styled with the same ready-to-wear denim skirt and my mom's black shoes, her white bag as well. It's so beautiful. I love it. Here is my second bloom top. This was a little different because it's print and it's got long sleeves. I made this one 1 inch longer than the one I made before, just because I wanted it a tad longer. It's still at the mid hip and I had enough fabric to do that. And this one has a square neckline on the back as well that you see up closer. Same denim skirt, same styling, my mom's bag here. Here's the top up closer with the length and the sleeves. Sleeves are quite full, they gather into a small little band there at the bottom. And there's also some gathers at the sleeve cap. Really, really nice sleeve. Voluminous, that's why I chose a flowy fabric. This is a rayon linen blend, mostly rayon, lightweight. Perfect. There is the square neckline. Harder to see the details with this one because of the print, but it's still really striking. There are the slight gathers on the sleeve cap. And I'll show you my square neckline at the back. It's higher than the front, obviously, because it's at the back. I think it looks really cute. And yeah, I really enjoyed the second version. It went pretty quickly. This one is actually more straightforward because you don't have to do the burrito method. You just sew your sleeve in there. In that way, it can be a little more straightforward. Both very enjoyable and I'm really happy with them. I love this print. I think it's so pretty. I love blue and I think it looks amazing with the denim skirt. Usually when there's options, I tend to sew sleeveless and long sleeves. I'm tending to avoid the short sleeve for some reason, but the short sleeve would be very much similar to this. It's the same pattern piece, just shorter, and the little band that goes at the bottom is going to be a little bit longer to match the wider bicep circumference compared to a wrist down here. So it would be exactly the same. I'm really, really happy with both. They were a delight to sew. I didn't find it extremely complicated. Of course, these are not tops you're going to sew in an hour or two, probably 3 or 4 hours it took me to sew them. And they were just so nice. I love taking my time to do the gathers neatly. It's just so enjoyable. And you know, you don't always have to sew a t-shirt. You know, you can do beautiful, beautiful garments like these and you're going to feel so proud when you're done. I absolutely love them and I highly recommend the pattern and the brand as well. Any pattern you get from Sinclair is always going to be amazing. That's all from me. I'm going to wait a little while to be able to wear these when it warms up. I'm really happy to have them. That's all from me. I hope you have an amazing day. Bye.